Hello and welcome back. So, I got some comments recently from one person, private channel, but I will call you Kevin, because Kevin is a very fitting name for you. These comments descended into the weirdest rant I think I'd ever seen that came down to aesthetics, and I want to talk about that. So, let's start the show, and I'm going to start the video with the end of the comments, the last comment he did, because it's funny. Bald Book Geek, it's got 5 seasons, so buckle up, buttercup, and hang on. I'm seriously hilarious by that one. Who ends their sentence with that, unless you're like a teenage boy in circa 1993? I mean, seriously. Are you getting down with the kids? You're what, like 40-something? Come on. Let's get into the real comments, though. It's all about watching a fantasy show. All the so far stuff is good, but I'm seeing so little fantasy it's annoying. Rings of Power has elves, dwarves, hobbits, sea monsters, linktree, orcs, talking trees, just in the trailer. And the trailer has more fantasy in it than the 8 seasons of Game of Thrones. Shadow demons and children of the forest. Tell me it's fantasy show. Show the fantasy. Wheel of Time ticks those boxes too. So what you're saying is you don't care about the writing, the characters, and you don't actually understand fantasy. Fantasy is a wide genre with a huge amount of detail, a huge amount of subgenres within it. Not all fantasy is high fantasy. Lord of the Rings, and as much to my disgust, The Rings of Power, is a high fantasy show. Just say that you like high fantasy, because fantasy is wide, it's huge, and you can have everything within it. By your logic, things like the Conan novels by Robert E. Howard aren't fantasy, but they are a subgenre of fantasy. They're swords and sandals, or swords and sorcery, depending. I think your logic is flawed here because it comes down to the aesthetics, and I do find that funny as well. Then you left this, and this was to a follower of mine. Not all right-wing snowflakes are gay, that's too much of a sweeping statement. Some must be incels. Joking aside, all I'm seeing is the hate, but that's the social media algorithm, throwing you stuff we react to. You only get to see the things that enrage. It's why I got a lot of jazz, I think he meant jizz, on my feet. Cobbled together altogether is a lazy phrase for simplicity. So, again, this is where you played your card, and this is where you kind of lost the thing. Your politics came out. You're judging everything on your socioeconomic politics. You're looking at it through that lens. And that's what's really funny. I'm amazed you didn't play the diversity and representation card. And then this is where we just go into the shitstorm. House of Dragons is not well written. The whole crab feeder thing was terrible. In the book he gets 2 paragraphs at best, and the show built him up too much. The stepstones could have been cleared in an afternoon. With a dragon. Fire the beach and cliffs. Once in the tunnel, fire them. Right down the mountain, seal them in. Martin can really write well, but it's not fantasy or battles. I finished Fire and Blood laying in bed from the virus. Really good. More accessible than the Silmarillion, but that has more fantasy. Okay, so again, you're playing the aesthetic card here. That's the disconnect. You are so upset that this show doesn't match your aesthetic. I find that strange on every level. And this is where everything just falls apart. But we'll get there. What I take away from these comments is that you are enraged. That something doesn't match your expectations of fantasy. That it doesn't match what you want from fantasy. That's fine. But own it. Don't insult other people's tastes and don't attack them. I've never attacked you, and I'm not attacking you now. Please don't harass this person. This is your entire conversation was basically redundant at this point. You were so upset that someone didn't like what you did. You accused me of rage baiting on a subject that I'm very, very knowledgeable on. which you don't seem to be. But again, fantasy is the biggest genre of fiction. It covers countless subgenres, and Game of Thrones is a different style of fantasy, and the Song of Ice and Fire and Martin's fantasy is a different style. It's social political fantasy set within a fantasy world that does use some fantasy tropes, but it's focusing on the relationships between the houses, the clans, the races, the people. It's a historical style fantasy, and that's its own subgenre as well. It isn't the high fantasy of Lord of the Rings, and I get what you want. But again, why are you so angry? This is my thing. No one is liking Rings of Power, and I get the feeling you only like it because it matches your political viewpoint. And like I said, I'm amazed you didn't play the diversity and representation card in your comments, because it was just hilarious to witness you fall apart. You were getting more and more flustered as it went on, and the comments were getting edited because you were getting angry. I get it, you play D&D, you do all this stuff, fine. But you want epic high fantasy. Go watch the Peter Jackson movies. They're amazing. Don't waste your time with Rings of Power. Rings of Power is a happy meal. It's an aesthetic, and not a very good one. But this is the downside to these type of people. And this is the big takeaway. They don't care about Lord of the Rings. They don't care about fantasy. They don't care about the actual content of what they're watching. They only care about the aesthetics. It's a very shallow way of looking at a genre, and a very shallow way of looking at countless other things as well. If all you care about is the aesthetics, then your reading comprehension must A, be non-existent, but also your understanding of story, structure and characterization must be non-existent. And it's a shame. But again, the minute you played certain cards and used gay as an insult, that was the second I knew where you were going. And don't ever play your hand in that way again. Subsequently, I removed you from the conversation because you don't insult the people that I follow, and you don't insult my followers or me. You can have a civil conversation, but don't be angry and triggered in my comments. Get over yourself.